Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cutting into a life that was really defined by extremes.
It really was.
On one side, you have this colossal, just undeniable artistic genius. And on the other, you have this chaotic, public, self-inflicted ruin.
A total collapse.
We are diving deep into the dizzying, tragic, and I have to say, utterly captivating story of John Barrymore, born John Sidney Blythe. He was a man whose existence was, well, less a career and more a theatrical comet.
That's a great way to put it. A comet that burned impossibly bright before just spectacularly collapsing.
It's really the ultimate cautionary tale, but it's disguised as high art, isn't it?
It is. When you talk about American theatrical royalty, Barrymore is right at the top. He's the most brilliant jewel in the whole Drew and Barrymore dynasty crown.
Right.
But like you said, his genius was just inextricably linked to his decline. The central conflict of his life, and this is what's so fascinating, is his ability to physically and psychologically master the most profound classical drama ever written, only to end up as, a figure of ridicule in the tabloid press.
That contradiction is what makes his story so essential.
It is. It's essential to understanding 20th century celebrity culture, really.
Okay, so let's unpack this mission for today. We're going to trace John Barrymore's pretty improbable journey. He started as this reluctant artist, someone who actively tried to avoid the stage entirely.
He really did not want to act.
And he goes from that to becoming, by almost universal consensus, the greatest living American tragedian. We'll detail his triumphs across 3 different media: the stage, silent film, and then sound film.
And then the fall.
And then we'll track that dramatic decade-long slide into self-parody that really characterized his final heartbreaking years.
And this really highlights the unique nature of his career trajectory, because it wasn't a single path. His professional life was like 4 distinct acts of triumph before that 5th messy fall.
4 acts.
He starts in light comedy and farce, mastering timing and wit. Then he makes this massive, almost impossible pivot to classical tragedy, which culminates in Shakespeare.
An incredible leap.
A huge leap. Then he conquers silent film, earning that unforgettable nickname, the Great Profile. And finally, his stage-trained voice was such a powerful, resonant asset that he becomes one of the few stars who genuinely thrived in early sound films when so many of his contemporaries just failed.
So many fell by the wayside.
Yeah. This makes him a truly singular figure in American acting history.
A 4-act professional miracle followed by a final public breakdown. Let's start where all good tragedies begin, with that theatrical royalty that was, well, more like a curse than a blessing.
Absolutely. You have to understand the sheer weight of his family name. I mean, his ancestry was just stacked.
Hard to even comprehend.
His mother, Georgie Drew Barrymore, she hailed from the highly prominent Drew family. Her mother, Louisa Lane Druso, John's maternal grandmother, was a legend in her own right.
Right, the manager.
An accomplished actress who managed the famous Arch Street Theater in Philadelphia for over 3 decades. So on his mother's side, you've got management, tradition, real theatrical power.
And his father.
Maurice Barrymore, born Herbert Blythe, a British actor of Indian descent, a genuine matinee idol of his time, famous for his wit, his charm, and his devastating good looks.
So he had it from both sides, the looks and the talent.
And he was the youngest of 3 iconic siblings, Lionel and Ethel. So this wasn't just a family of actors. They were culturally the rock stars of the American stage in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The expectation on John was just immense.
But despite all that grand lineage and public glamour, his youth sounds anything but stable. It sounds like a deeply unsettled, groundedless upbringing.
Oh, far from it. His parents were constantly touring, which was common for actors then, but it meant John, or Jack, as they called him, experienced a tremendous amount of instability. He was often just shuffled around.
And that instability, it reaches a tragic head pretty early on, doesn't it?
It does. By 1893, he was just 11 years old, and his mother died from tuberculosis.
And because of their careers, he wasn't even that close to her.
No, not really. Because of the constant touring and all the time he spent away at boarding schools, he barely knew her. This void was partially filled by his maternal grandmother, Louisa Drew, who primarily raised him.
And she was the disciplinarian.
She was a stern, highly disciplined woman, completely devoted to the theater, and she tried, with very limited success, to impose some kind of order on the naturally chaotic and undisciplined young John.
And the attempts to instill discipline, they clearly failed. The source material details him being sent away to elementary schools in 4 different states because of his troublesome behavior.
They were desperately trying to contain him.
It seems like it.
They were. He was first sent to the boys' annex of the Convent of Notre Dame in Philadelphia. And here's a beautiful irony. The school tried to punish him for his mischief by forcing him to read this dense, difficult book, Dante's Inferno.
A pretty heavy punishment for a kid.
Right. But when he looked at the illustrations by Gustave Doré, the darkness and the drama of the imagery just ignited something in him. He realized he wanted to be an artist, an illustrator. That initial artistic ambition, not acting, was what drove him first.
But the bad behavior just kept escalating. He was expelled from Seton Hall and then Georgetown Preparatory School. And the circumstances around the Georgetown expulsion in 1897, they're pretty grim. They speak volumes about his self-destructive streak already forming.
Yeah, biographers are quite specific about that expulsion. It's often cited as a critical low point because his chronic problem with alcohol, which started around age 14, was already getting out of control.
14? Wow.
Yeah. One theory is simple inebriation. The other, which was offered by a close contemporary, is far more sensational. That he was expelled after being caught waiting in a brothel. It illustrates an early appetite for just reckless behavior.
So he's demonstrating this intense emotional chaos. And in that same year, 1897, he loses the last stable female figure in his life, his grandmother, Louisa Drew.
It's a convergence of tragedies. He lost his disciplinarian and his only stable home, which left him essentially rudderless. But all this chaos, this came before the truly profound and terrifying trauma that would haunt him for the rest of his life.
The decline of his father.
The mental decline of his father. That's the impossible weight he carried. In March 1901, his father, Maurice, suffered a severe mental breakdown. It was due to tertiary syphilis.
And John, at just 19, had to be the one to deal with it.
He had the agonizing duty of petitioning the court and personally taking his father to Bellevue Hospital. Maurice was later transferred to a private institution in Amityville where he suffered this rapid descent into madness until his death in 1905.
That experience must have been just absolutely traumatic, witnessing the complete loss of identity and sanity in your own father.
A close friend later reported that the bleak overtone of this event, this breaking of his parents' reason, it never quite died away in Barrymore's mind. He was perpetually haunted by fears he would suffer the same fate.
That generational dread.
It's the bedrock of the Barrymore tragedy. It provides the context for his later self-destruction, almost as if he was rushing toward the end he feared the most.
And despite carrying that dread, he still actively tried to pursue art, still trying to avoid what he called the curse of the stage.
He was fiercely set on being an artist. He studied literature and art in London at the Slade School of Fine Art, absorbing the culture he felt was, higher than the theater. He came back to New York and found work as an illustrator for the New York Evening Journal, earning a respectable $50 a week.
Which was a decent salary at the turn of the century?
Very decent. But the self-destructive tendencies derailed even this steady gig.
So?
Swiftly. This attempt ended in May 1902 when he was fired for producing an illustration that was just so poor-smudged, lacking definition. It was immediately clear he was severely hungover.
And that was it?
That was it. It was after this humiliating failure that the reality set in. The art career was over.
And that's the precise moment we get that brilliant, cynical quote summing up his reluctant entry into the family business.
Exactly. He was discussing his non-existent future with his brother Lionel, and he famously said, and I'm quoting here, "It looks as though I'll have to succumb to the family curse, acting."
He later admitted the real reason, though.
He did. He later admitted the lack of romance and high art in the decision. I needed the money. So it was necessity, not passion or artistic drive that pushed him onto the boards.
And necessity led to disaster. His first professional stage appearances were, predictably, chaotic.
Yeah.
Tell us about that confirmed anecdote of his earliest appearance with Ethel in 1901.
Oh, it's classic. It was in his sister Ethel's big show, Captain Jinks of the Horse Marines. John had barely prepared. He was learning his lines frantically on the train ride to the performance city.
Not a great start.
Not at all. In the first act, he just completely stopped mid-dialogue, couldn't recall a single word. He stood there, looking out at the confused audience and his horrified castmates, and managed to stammer out, "I've blown up. Where do we go from here?"
He said that to the audience.
To the audience. The cast had to improvise the rest of the scene. It's just an immediate signal of his complete lack of professionalism and discipline at the time.
And before he even fully committed to this career he didn't want, he was already starring in a real-life melodrama that put him adjacent to one of the biggest scandals of the early century.
The Evelyn Nesbit affair.
Tell us about that.
This is fantastic early tabloid fodder. Evelyn Nesbit was the beautiful artist's model, the original it girl, a Floridor girl. And Barrymore, with his own rakish charm, was captivated. They had a romantic affair in 1902, and Barrymore, impulsively proposed marriage.
And Nesbit's mother vetoed it, right? Seeing Barrymore as irresponsible and without means.
Correct. Her mother deemed him a poor match, a struggling, irresponsible, drunken artist. Nesbit was physically sent away to break off the relationship.
And just a few years later, in 1906, Nesbit becomes the central figure in the trial of the century.
The very same. When her mentally unstable husband, Harry K. Thaw, shot and killed her former lover, the prominent architect Stanford White, on the rooftop of Madison Square Garden.
So Barrymore was dating the woman whose earlier affair was the direct cause of this sensational murder trial. And there was speculation he might be called to testify.
He was just a magnet for drama, even when he was trying to avoid the stage. It highlights a crucial point. The tabloid character wasn't a mask he adopted later in life. He was always inclined towards scandal, chaos, and placing himself in the most theatrical positions possible. The public spectacle was always his natural environment.
That inclination toward chaos eventually gave way to this remarkable, though temporary, period of discipline. It's almost as if the sheer weight of the family name and his own untapped talent just forced him into line.
For a while, yeah.
Let's trace his ascent. He started his professional stage career in 1903, but he was known initially as a comic, right?
He started at the bottom, doing light comedy and farces. These roles required a very specific skill set: deft movement, charm, impeccable comic timing. His mentor during the run of The Dictator was the actor William Collier, who is a master of comedy.
And Collier coached him.
He did. He worked hard to coach him, but Barrymore's increasing drinking and unreliability were a constant source of frustration. One biographer noted that Collier at times regretted his sponsorship because Barrymore was missing cues and sometimes entire performances.
Rob, but he was moving up the financial ladder. He started at $50 a week, then $175, and eventually $600 a week for lead roles. But he still hadn't found his own voice. He was essentially a very charming imitation of his famous uncle.
Exactly. A critic for the Washington Times observed in 1912 that Barrymore inimitably imitates his uncle John Drew. He was just relying on inherited mannerisms and looks.
And that lasted for a while.
This period of being a charming mimic lasted until the mid-1910s. And the shift was largely motivated by an outsider, the playwright Edward Sheldon. Sheldon saw a genuine depth in Barrymore and was instrumental in nudging him away from those lighthearted, self-mocking comedy roles toward roles of genuine dramatic substance.
And the true artistic breakthrough came in 1916, when he took the lead in John Galsworthy's powerful prison drama, Justice. This was not a charming farce. This was grim, realistic theater.
That role changed everything. It was the moment he proved he had the weight for serious drama. The New York Times review was transformative. It stated that Barrymore stepped forward into a new position on the American stage with an extraordinary performance in every detail.
He was no longer just a handsome rake or an imitation.
No. He was finally recognized as a serious, compelling, dramatic actor.
This success paved the path to the greatest test in the English language, Shakespeare. We know he faced criticism about his vocal limitations and lack of stage presence earlier in his career. So how did he overcome that to tackle roles like Richard III and Hamlet?
This is where we see that intense discipline that contrasts so sharply with his public chaos. To prepare for these serious roles, he undertook an astonishing level of professional rigor. He worked with Margaret Carrington, a renowned voice and diction trainer.
So he was aware of the criticism.
Very aware. Conscious of the criticism of his projection and vocal range, he worked with her daily, up to 6 hours a day for 6 weeks straight.
6 hours a day.
6 hours. This was not just practice. This was a complete vocal reconstruction aimed at projecting power and clarity. It was an effort utterly contrary to his persona as the lazy, drunken inheritor.
That level of commitment really shows us that the genius was real and it was hard-won. And the payoff was immediate when he performed Richard III in 1920.
The critics were just effusive, stunned by the transformation. The Washington Herald praised the audience being held by the sheer power of Barrymore's performance, and they noted the unexpected vocal richness he had developed.
And the Times.
Alexander Woollcott in the New York Times thought the performance marked a measurable advance in the gradual process of bringing Barrymore's technical fluency abreast with his winged imagination and his real genius for the theater. He was channeling his own darkness and energy into the role of this monstrous, compelling villain.
But this incredible triumph, it came at a terrifying cost that foreshadowed his later breakdown.
It absolutely did. The production was a huge critical success, yet it closed after only 31 performances.
Why? Why so short a run?
Because Barrymore had been working ceaselessly. While appearing on stage as Richard III every single evening, he was simultaneously filming the definitive screen version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde during the day.
That's an insane schedule.
The physical and emotional strain was just too much. He collapsed from a severe nervous breakdown and had to spend 6 weeks recuperating in a sanitarium. The price of that genius was nearly immediate self-destruction.
Yet, he recovered and pushed even further. That intense effort, that commitment to high art, reached its absolute pinnacle with Hamlet 2 years later.
Hamlet in 1922 was the undisputed peak of his theatrical career. He and the director, Arthur Hopkins, spent 6 months preparing the text. And this wasn't a traditional reverent interpretation. No. They approached the text with a modern psychological eye. They made the revolutionary decision to deliberately cut over 1,250 lines from the text.
That's a massive risk. Cutting that much Shakespeare is unheard of. Why was that so crucial to his interpretation?
It was crucial because Barrymore wanted to strip away the melancholy tradition that dominated the role. The idea of Hamlet as this weak, overly intellectual, depressed figure.
So he saw him differently.
Completely. Barrymore described his Hamlet as a normal, healthy, lusty young fellow who simply got into a mess that was too thick for him. He was a great fencer, an athlete, a man who led an active, healthy life. By cutting the text, he focused the play purely on the psychological descent of a dynamic, dangerous man confronting impossible circumstances.
And he broke a record that had stood for decades, set by one of the greatest American actors in history.
He broke the record set by Edwin Booth for continuous performances of Hamlet, closing after 101 shows. The accolades were monumental. The critics had run out of superlatives. Brooklyn Life flatly stated that Barrymore had doubtless won the right to be called the greatest living American tragedian.
And that designation wasn't just hyperbolic praise at the time. His specific interpretation had a profound and enduring impact on how the role was viewed by subsequent generations of actors.
His legacy is defined by this moment. His psychological interpretation and the way he delivered the text, that shift to colloquial verse speaking, it fundamentally changed the direction of subsequent revivals. Orson Welles, who later became a great director and actor himself, affirmed that Barrymore was the best Hamlet he had ever seen.
What did Wells say about it?
He described the character as a man of genius who happened to be a prince, and he was tender and virile and witty and dangerous. Barrymore just injected a raw, modern vitality into the role.
And while he was achieving this artistic summit, his personal life remained turbulent. We should briefly note his complicated romantic life, which included a divorce and a second marriage to a prominent literary figure.
That's right. He divorced his first wife, Catherine Corey Harris, in late 1917. Then, in 1920, he married Blanche Ulrichs. She was a suffragist, a socialite, and a well-respected poet who published under the pseudonym Michael Strange.
And their relationship was highly publicized.
Very. It began while she was still married. They had a daughter, Diana Barrymore, in 1921. But even in this period of peak professional success, the marriage was strained by his continued drinking and Ulrichs' own affairs during their travels abroad. The instability, it never truly vanished.
So, by the mid-1920s, John Barrymore had achieved the absolute summit of American theater. He was performing Hamlet in London to effusive praise, setting a new standard for classical acting.
He was at the top of the world.
Yet, having literally broken the record for Hamlet, he chose to walk away from the stage almost entirely for 14 years. That seems like an unbelievable professional pivot.
It was a very deliberate and fascinating choice. He left the stage after that 1925 London Hamlet run. He claimed his motivation was the lack of repetition in film. He said that the continual playing of a part, which is so ruinous to an actor, is entirely eliminated in cinema.
So he just hated the repetition.
He hated it. And of course, the immense burgeoning salaries in Hollywood also provided a pretty powerful motivation.
Let's track his transition to film. His earliest confirmed feature debut was the romantic comedy An American Citizen in 1914. He was prolific, but not immediately successful in every venture.
No, he was a working actor. He later dismissed The Red Widow as the worst film I ever made in his autobiography. But his silent film success rapidly accelerated, culminating, as we mentioned, in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1920.
That dual role was a sensation.
It was. Critics deemed it a masterpiece of transformation and performance, and this film had a completely unexpected afterlife. It did. It showcased his ability to physically embody psychological terror and transformation. The film was so universally successful and his makeup so striking that the U.S. Navy actually used stills of him as the terrifying, monstrous hide in their recruiting posters.
You're kidding? It's hard to imagine the U.S. Navy using stills of a drug-addled doctor and his demonic alter ego to recruit sailors? What were they trying to communicate with those posters?
It really just speaks to the ubiquity and power of his image. They were using him as a shorthand for intensity and physical drama. But more importantly, this is the era where he develops one of the most famous monikers in Hollywood history.
Great profile.
The Great Profile. The name came about because he was always photographed and filmed favoring his left side, which was supposedly his more classically handsome angle.
And he had a line about that, didn't he?
Ah! He did. Ever the wit, he had this famous self-deprecating explanation for the nickname. He said, "The right side of my face looks like a fried egg. The left side has features that are to be found in almost any normal anthropological specimen, and those are the apples I try to keep on top of the barrel."
It's a great example of him simultaneously embracing and mocking his own celebrity.
It is, and he was commanding massive salaries from the studios based on that silent film reputation. He was Hollywood royalty.
How much are we talking?
Warner Bros. Signed him to a lucrative contract for 3 films at a phenomenal salary of $76,250 per picture.
Wow, in the 1920s.
To put that in perspective, that was well over $1 million per picture in today's value. He was living the high life, provided with a luxurious suite at the Ambassador Hotel and a personal chauffeur limousine. The works.
His first film under that contract, The Sea Beast from 1926, a loose adaptation of Moby Dick, was a major moneymaker for Warner Bros., but it was also significant for his private life, leading to his third marriage.
High drama on and off screen. He was set to play Captain Ahab Seeley. While he initially wanted Mary Astor for the female lead, the studio cast Dolores Costello, a young actress known for her incredible beauty.
And he fell for her immediately.
Instantly. Barrymore later admitted the intensity of his reaction. "I fell in love with her instantly. This time I knew I was right." They began an affair on set, which led to a public separation between Costello's parents and, eventually, his marriage to her in 1928. They had 2 children, Dolores and John Drew Barrymore.
So the late 1920s bring the sound revolution, which spelled doom for so many silent stars. They had great faces, but often unsuitable voices. But for a highly trained Shakespearean actor like Barrymore, this was a massive, unexpected advantage.
This is a crucial technical point. Barrymore's stage training, particularly that intense vocal coaching he received from Margaret Carrington for his Shakespeare roles, it paid dividends in the talkie era.
Explain why. Why was the stage-trained voice such a game-changer when sound first arrived?
Well, many silent film actors struggled for a few reasons. First, their voices were often thin, nasal, or poorly projected because they were never trained to fill a large theater. They relied on expression. Second, they struggled with diction when you put a microphone right in front of them.
But Barrymore was different.
Completely. He had trained for Richard III and Hamlet. He had immense projection, clear, precise diction, and he understood pacing, how to speak dramatic verse without rushing or mumbling. This meant his voice was not only audible, but commanding, resonant, and inherently dramatic.
So it was an effortless transition for him. His first speaking role was in the segment of The Show of Shows in 1929. Then his critically acclaimed performance in Svengali in 31 solidified his place.
That role, playing the manipulative voice coach, was just perfect for him. The critic for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle called his performance brilliant, one of the best of his movie career. He was soaring professionally again.
But despite this critical success, the box office returns on his 5-film deal with Warner Bros., which was disappointing, which led him to transition to MGM, even taking a salary cut.
It was a successful recalibration. At MGM, he co-starred with his brother Lionel in Arsène Lupin, and then was cast in the lavish, star-studded Best Picture winner Grand Hotel in 1932.
A huge film.
Co-starring Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, and Lionel again, he delivered a highly regarded, romantic performance. It's a film that remains a cornerstone of Hollywood history. It was later inducted into the National Film Registry.
And that same year, 1932, saw a legendary, if critically disastrous project that forced all 3 Barrymore siblings, John, Ethel, and Lionel, to share the screen for the first and only time.
Rasputin and the Empress, it was one of the biggest casting events of the decade, but a fascinating artistic failure. The critical reception was poor, and MGM lost significant money.
But what's really poignant about this film for John Barrymore is that biographers note this is where the physical toll of his chronic drinking was starting to become impossible to hide.
Yes, the famous great profile was beginning to crumble.
How
He had gained weight, his face looked dissipated, showing the effects of years of intemperance. The studio had to pull out all the stops, relying heavily on lights, filters, and makeup to try and reconstruct his famous spiritual beauty.
So it was a visible sign that the decline had begun.
A clear, visible sign. The New Yorker, which was never kind, thought all three Barrymores produced their worst work in that film, and it noted the obvious visual strain on John.
Here's where it gets really interesting and also profoundly sad. Around 1932, John Barrymore, still a major film star, enters this period of sharp physical and professional deterioration.
Right.
The chaotic personal life that always simmered under the surface now began to actively corrode his career, starting with his core talent.
And the primary professional symptom of this deterioration was memory loss. His chronic alcoholism was just destroying his ability to concentrate and retain lines. It became a serious, regular issue.
The RKO anecdote is maybe the most devastating early example of his reliability vanishing.
It's awful. He was cast in the film Hat, Coat, and Glove when, over 2 consecutive days of filming, he failed repeatedly to remember the script. He just couldn't do it. And RKO had to replace him entirely with Ricardo Cortez.
That's a studio replacement mid-production. I mean, that's a professional death knell that costs massive money and time. It's hard to imagine anyone recovering from that level of professional humiliation.
And yet, even as he was falling apart, he delivered some of his most memorable and arguably most self-reflective work.
The irony is rich, isn't it? The roles themselves started mirroring his decline, feeding the public perception.
They really did. In 1933, he was in Dinner at 8 with Lionel, playing Larry Renault. The character is a washed-up, alcoholic, once great silent film actor. This was not a heroic role.
He was playing his own ghost.
One biographer suggested that playing this character fixed in the public's and MGM's mind that John Barrymore was a drunken has-been.
But his genius for high comedy hadn't abandoned him. His 1934 role in 20th Century is lauded as one of the greatest screwball comedies ever made, directly contradicting the persona of the fading tragedian.
It's a remarkable contradiction. In Howard Hawks' 20th Century, he played the madcap Broadway impresario Oscar Jaffed. The role demanded over-the-top melodrama, theatrical flamboyance, and this manic energy qualities his failing personal life now fed directly into his performance.
So he could still turn it on.
He demonstrated a rare genius as a comedian. This performance is considered by many to be his finest contribution to film, and the film itself was later added to the National Film Registry. It proved that the talent, though unreliable and buried under the chaos, was still explosively present when the character allowed for maximum theatricality.
And he also starred in Katharine Hepburn's screen debut, A Bill of Divorcement in '32, where he played an escaped lunatic who had lost his sanity during the war. So the roles were either high comedy or characters teetering on the edge of sanity.
The line between the character and the reality was getting razor thin. Meanwhile, his private life was collapsing under the intense scrutiny of the press, fulfilling the promise of the tabloid character.
His marriage to Dolores Costello ended.
He divorced Dolores Costello in 1935, and the court proceedings were brutal. She cited mental cruelty and habitual intemperance. He was hospitalized shortly thereafter for a severe mental and physical breakdown, which essentially confirmed Costello's claim that he was a hopeless alcoholic.
And then came the scandal that truly solidified his status as a tabloid character. His marriage to a fan young enough to be his daughter.
His relationship and subsequent marriage in 1936 to Elaine Barry, a 19-year-old fan, was just sensationalized by the press. The tabloids gleefully labeled the couple Caliban and Ariel.
A pretty cruel nickname.
A stark, cruel contrast between the aging, physically deteriorated star, Caliban, and the young, beautiful fan, Ariel. Their relationship was volatile, public, and constant front-page news.
And the public chaos reached its peak with that famous plea for his return.
It's the kind of stunt a screenwriter would dismiss as too outlandish. After a massive argument, Barrymore left for Los Angeles. Elaine Barry, desperate to get him back, actually chartered a plane and, using the plane's radio, broadcast a sobbing, dramatic plea for him to return.
So their argument became national news.
Their pursuit and argument became national news headlines. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a traveling circus.
And while he was achieving that level of public spectacle, the financial ruin compounded his humiliation. He was burning through money faster than he could earn it.
Despite his high salaries, his lifestyle was catastrophically unsustainable. He maintained mansions, expensive homes, and most notably his beloved 120-foot yacht, the Infanta.
And that costs a fortune to run.
Over $35,000 a year just on maintenance and crew. This recklessness meant the money was gone almost as soon as he earned it. He filed for bankruptcy protection in 1937, facing staggering debts of $160,000, a figure equivalent to millions today.
Which forced him to sell the yacht.
He had to sell the Infanta. He was working purely to honor his debts, often against his will. This financial humiliation just amplified the public spectacle of his decline.
So when he was occasionally hired for serious roles during this period, the studios had to take what amounted to extraordinary, humiliating precautions just to ensure he showed up and stayed sober long enough to perform.
It speaks to the residual power of his name, but also the severity of his addiction. When MGM risked casting him as Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet in 1936, they physically housed him in Kelly's Rest Home, a sanatorium for alcoholics, for the duration of the shoot to minimize disruption.
Did it work?
Not really. He continued to drink covertly and was reportedly disruptive on set. His co-star, Basil Rathbone, sadly recounted that it was sad to see him in such a state, seeing the ghost of the great tragedian.
And even his one-time admirer, John Gielgud, who had praised his Hamlet, was brutal about his performance in that film.
Gielgud, who was a theatrical purist, saw the film and was horrified. He wrote to a colleague that Barrymore looked like a monstrous old male impersonator jumping through a hoop who should really have been shot.
That's harsh.
It shows the genius was clearly fading under the weight of the personal deterioration, even if the showmanship remained.
And to compensate for his severe memory problems, which were becoming chronic, he had to rely on a tool rarely used by serious actors on screen.
Cue cards. It was a necessity by this point. By the time he filmed his last serious role, The Great Man Votes in 1939, he relied heavily on massive, omnipresent cue cards.
Yet, even in this diminished state, there was still some professional respect.
Enormous professional respect. The director, Garson Kanin, made sure the cast and crew addressed him consistently as Mr. Barrymore, acknowledging the residual power and genius he commanded, even if his memory was shot.
But the true final act was the stage farce, My Dear Children, in 1939. This wasn't a serious play. This was an authorized professional public breakdown designed for profit.
It was pure, unadulterated, and wildly successful self-parody. The play was a weak stage farce where he played Alan Manville, an aging, hammy Shakespearean has-been.
And he just went off script.
Completely. Because his memory was shot anyway, he gave up even trying to stick to the script. He ad-libbed constantly, sometimes greeting friends he spotted in the audience, using profanities that shocked and delighted patrons, or simply making jokes about his own life and drinking.
He had turned the theater into a personalized circus.
Absolutely. Life magazine observed the phenomenon perfectly. They noted that people flocked to see him not for polished performance, but because he converts the theater into a rowdy, histrionic madhouse. Sometimes he arrives late, sometimes he is tight, usually he forgets his lines, but he always puts on a great show.
He realized his most profitable performance was John Barrymore, the drunk theatrical relic.
Exactly. And this led directly to his final film roles, where the studios deliberately capitalized on the spectacle of his decline. The Great Profile in 1940 had him playing Evans Garrick, a famous aging actor closely modeled on himself.
And his final film?
His final film, Playmates in 1941, went the whole distance. He literally played an alcoholic Shakespearean ham named, quite simply, John Barrymore. It amply illustrated the depths to which he had fallen professionally, turning his personal tragedy into an extended, profitable joke.
So how did the curtain finally fall on this incredible, self-destructive career?
In a way that was, again, pure theater. In his final working years, he was appearing regularly on radio on Rudy Vallee's Siltish show, continuing this vein of self-parody, joking about his drinking, his finances, his marital issues. On May 19, 1942, while recording a line from Romeo and Juliet for the show, a final nod to the tragedy he had abandoned, John Barrymore collapsed.
He collapsed on air?
During the recording. He died 10 days later, on May 29, at the age of 60, from cirrhosis of the liver and kidney failure, complicated by pneumonia. He had briefly returned to his childhood Catholic faith shortly before his death.
So, as we look at the whole arc of his life, from the haunted child to the greatest tragedian to the tabloid clown, the critical assessment is startlingly unanimous. The obituaries universally confirm his genius, but lament his dissipation and the monumental waste of talent.
They absolutely do. The New York Times obituary stated that during his period of triumphs, Justice, Richard III, Hamlet, he was accepted by most critics as the foremost English-speaking actor of his time, equipped both by nature and by art. But almost immediately they pivoted to the tragedy of his waste.
What did the others say?
The Manchester Guardian believed he might, with some self-discipline, have added his name to the list of truly great actors, yet he dissipated his energies.
That concept of dissipated energy is key. What about the assessment that crystallized his ultimate fate in the eyes of the public?
That's the famous line from the Washington Post, which noted that with the passing of the years and as his private life became more public, he became, despite his genius in the theater, a tabloid character. He intentionally played the clown and burlesqued himself, what the New York Times called a mood of careless abdication.
So the public fascination with his personal life, his 4 marriages, his drinking, his finances, ultimately eclipsed his artistic achievements.
It did, but it's important, however, not to let that tabloid decline overshadow the artistic heights. His influence on classical acting remains profoundly important.
How so?
His stage portrayals of Richard III and Hamlet were radical and modernizing forces. His unique psychological interpretation of characters and his revolutionary colloquial verse-speaking making Shakespeare sound like natural contemporary speech rather than formal recitation completely reversed the stiff older stage conventions of the time.
So he redefined how those classical roles were approached.
He literally redefined them for the entire 20th century, setting the model for actors like Laurence Olivier and Orson Welles.
Beyond his artistic influence, he did receive recognition, though not necessarily through the traditional serious awards channels.
No, he was honored on relatively few occasions by the formal industry. His one and only screen award came not from a major body, but from Rudolph Valentino in 1925 for Beau Brummel. Valentino created an award in his own name to recognize his fellow actors' screen work.
But his enduring fame led to a very unique fitting honor at Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1940.
Right. Alongside the standard hand and footprints, John Barrymore left something unique in the cement.
What was it?
He left an imprint of his famous facial profile in the cement. It was a perfect, self-aware commemoration for the great profile, forever cementing his physical legacy in Hollywood history. He and his famous siblings were also later inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame.
And the dynasty, that family curse he initially tried to avoid, continued through the generations, ensuring the Barrymore name endures.
It did. The acting continued through his children, Diana and John Drew Barrymore, both of whom had complex, often troubled lives, echoing their father's patterns. And famously, the dynasty continues today through his granddaughter, Drew Barrymore, ensuring the theatrical bloodline remains active and highly visible.
His life also inspired dramatic portrayals, the family dynamic and theatrical chaos, just right for fictionalization.
Oh, absolutely. The famous play The Royal Family, later adapted for film, features a character based directly on John Barrymore, the charismatic, chaotic, and handsome actor who returns home only to cause trouble. That character was later played by Frederick March and Laurence Olivier. This shows how immediately his life transcended biography and became pure mythology.
Finally, we have to address the most bizarre, enduring, and somewhat macabre story attached to his death.
The corpse story.
The tale of his corpse being borrowed for a final theatrical prank.
The famous anecdote involving his friend, the swashbuckling actor Errol Flynn, and film director Raoul Walsh. Flynn claimed in his memoirs that Walsh borrowed Barrymore's body before the burial, leaving his corpse propped in a chair in Flynn's living room for a drunken Flynn to discover when he returned home.
It's the kind of dark legend that perfectly caps off a life of chaos and self-parody.
It is, but it was disputed for decades. Gene Fowler, a close friend of Barrymore, claimed he stayed with the body all night and denied the story vehemently.
But there's a recent update to that story, isn't there?
There is. In a 2020 interview, his granddaughter, Drew Barrymore, claimed that the Flynn account of the body being borrowed was accurate. Whether it's true or simply the ultimate piece of apocryphal Barrymore mythology, it remains the final theatrical prank played upon the world. A posthumous moment of farce that cemented his legend.
So what does this all mean? We've traced John Barrymore's path from this reluctant child of theatrical royalty, haunted by the terrifying possibility of his father's tragic illness, to the absolute master of Shakespearean performance, the greatest American tragedian.
Right.
We saw him conquer silent and sound film, commanding massive fame and massive salaries.
But we also saw the profound and, well, inevitable cost of the chaos that was always present. His life is a stark, public example of personal demons, especially that chronic alcoholism that started in his teens, colliding disastrously with extreme public scrutiny.
He burned his ships, his fortune, and his health.
He did. He ultimately turned himself into the tabloid character who filed for bankruptcy and had to rely on cue cards just to finish his scenes.
Yet, even in his ruin, he maintained an artistic edge by leaning into the performance of his own failure. He took his tragedy, the memory loss, the alcoholism, the marital failures, and deliberately engineered it into profitable public farce with shows like My Dear Children.
He was essentially satirizing his entire life story for his final curtain call.
It's a remarkable cultural insight into self-destruction and public spectacle. You, the listener, are left to consider the complexity of a man whose artistic discipline could produce genuine, canonical genius, that intense 6-week training for Richard III, but whose personal life was defined by the complete opposite: reckless intemperance and eventual memory loss.
So here's where it leaves you. Barrymore's greatest stage triumph, Hamlet, broke a performance record, but it closed early because he collapsed from exhaustion.
Right.
Conversely, his final successful roles involved him deliberately mocking his own struggles as a drunken has-been. Given this duality, the high cost of his brilliance versus the low, profitable cost of his decline, does his legacy ultimately show that genius requires self-preservation, or that true, relentless artistic honesty sometimes requires the reckless destruction of the self?
A difficult question for a complex life. We'll leave that with you.
Until the next deep dive.